Now let's talk about data. Rounding this out here, data is, of course, super important when we're communicating, but it's not just about how we actually analyze the data or the summary statistics we came up with. It's about how it's actually presented. And when we think about the visual perception we've already talked about, we already should have some of this concept here. I'm just going to go through some examples and talk about the data to ink ratio. Now, this is the idea here where we have a chart like this, and in the data viz world, we would say this has a ton of chart junk. And chart junk are basically dots on the page, or ink in the old days, that isn't data. So every dot on here, every piece of ink used to display something that isn't data is wasted ink. It isn't something that we want. We want to reduce it as much as possible. So think about what we could do here. On the left, we have an absurd amount of extra zeros. Now, this example, of course, is a bit over the top because I wanted to illustrate the point. And think about these grid lines. What are they? These kind of prison bars that we put the data behind. All of this stuff is not healthy. It's not helping the viz at all. In fact, it's distracting. Down on the bottom, we have some super big, bold year labels. That's actually not horrible. Then you have this text on the bottom. I could do without that in this example. On top, we have some shading around our title. All of these things aren't great. They're not really adding value. And then on the right, we have our region label. This actually is necessary for this because otherwise we would have no idea what we're looking at. But there really isn't a message here. In fact, choosing the right chart type is also a key part of displaying data correctly. In this case, I'm looking at data over time. And all this research suggests that the best way to look at data over time is using lines. And furthermore, this is a stacked chart. So if I actually wanted to understand a trend, for example, which of these are trending up or down, it's almost impossible to visually do that. I would literally have to write down a bunch of ideas and come up with it and kind of redraw it in my head, which really isn't efficient. So what can we do here? Well, we can change the labels on the left, we can remove the grid lines, change the chart type, change the colors, do a lot. Let's make one sweeping change here and see what we could do in the first pass of cleaning this up. So here what I've done, I've shrunk down the axis so they're not super bold and big like they were before. I've removed all those extra zeros and added a B to indicate that we're looking at billions. I've converted it to a line chart because that was the key here, is that we actually want to look at data over time. So it's not something that we would even want a bar chart for necessarily. And I've added the labels directly onto the chart, so I don't have to bounce back and forth. My eye doesn't have to track and try to remember which color I'm looking at and associate it to a color legend. I really don't like having to have color legends or those things on there if you can just label directly on the chart. That's much more easy, much more efficient. Here you can easily determine exactly what's going on. Europe, of course, is killing it. Americas is on the upward trend. Asia in 2012 surpassed the Americas, which is maybe the first time in at least the past 12 years in this chart. And then down below, everything is kind of low, the Africa and Oceania and all these other areas. So depending on what my analysis is, this could be meaningful or not, but certainly this is a less chart junky way to look at it. There is a higher data to ink ratio here, and it's easier to understand and consume visually for sure. Now, if I wanted to focus this analysis, and this is really where the transition is, if you built this chart, I would say you're doing okay. Now, if you wanted to have a specific point, such as Europe dominates when it comes to tourism, or Asia just took over Americas in 2012, you want to highlight and reduce all of the other colors, remove all the other labels, and focus solely on that single point. So let's do that here in this example. Now here in this last one, what I've done is I've removed the shading around the title, I've removed the borders around the line chart, I've removed all the labels except for the one I want you to focus on, which is Europe, and I also have changed all the colors, so there's only one contrast here, Europe and everything else. The point here is that Europe has dominated in the tourism income by region since 2000. Now notice I took out the axes on the left side because on the title of the chart I'm saying this is tourism income, so you can be assumed that when I have a number there like 400B, that it's 400 billion in tourism income by region. So easy enough, stripped all the way down, and the message just shines directly through. Going back to that visual perception talk when we looked at how to find the number of fives, think about that. This is the representation of that, the same effect of the pre-attentive processing. When you looked at this chart, it was probably impossible to avoid looking at the orange color and the word Europe, which means that the message of Europe is dominating here shined right through before you could even comprehend what was going on. That's what we want to do when we present data. When we build interactive dashboards or things that we're going to use in regular meetings that need 50 buttons on them, that's a different type of analysis. Here, what we want to do is present the information and share it in a way where our message shines through.